He's not here, but we do have a quorum, so I am going to call the September 30th, 2024 Select Board meeting to order. The first item on our agenda are some opening remarks by yours truly. So I'll begin. Tonight's Select Board meeting is focused on the residential tax exemption. It is our only topic. In these opening remarks, I will address the whys of why are we dedicating this meeting to the RTE, and why did the Select Board enact the RTE in the first place. Last November, the Select Board voted to initiate a 10% RTE. The RTE can be as low as 5% and as high as 35%. It is one of a limited number of methods available to us via Mass General Law to determine tax rates. We cannot raise taxes using methods not already prescribed by the state legislature. So we're limited on what we can do. We've got maybe 5 or 6 methods available to us. We can't just make them up as Select Board members. Using available methods, we seek ways to align our tax structure with our values. If we accept that diversity and inclusion are our core values, and if we recognize that housing is a cornerstone of diversity and inclusivity, then the RTE advances our goals of diversity and inclusivity by enabling residents to age in their homes, by allowing people with different levels of wealth to move in or continue to live in our town, and promoting more heterogeneity in our housing stock. Concord has a long history of studying tax fairness methods. Our most recent Tax Fairness Committee disbanded in June of 2022 after promoting the senior means tested exemption. Unfortunately, only 34 people in town took advantage of that exemption, far below our expectations. At that meeting, the June 2022 meeting, the Tax Fairness Committee members suggested that we give the residential tax exemption a try. The following year, we did. Why are we having this meeting tonight? We are 1 year into our experience with the RTE. We have 1 year's worth of data to begin to understand how it is or is not working for us. Tonight's presentation by our town assessor will give us some initial data on our participation in the RTE, clear up some misconceptions about the RTE, and outline the factors impacting your FY24 tax bills. After Ms. Stone's presentation, we will open the floor to hear comments from you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith Stone, our town assessor.
Good evening, and thank you everyone for coming. The residential tax exemption presentation, my name is Meredith Stone, and I'm the town assessor. What is it? Enacted in 1979, the residential tax exemption is an option under Property Tax Class Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5C, that shifts the tax burden within the residential class from owners of moderately valued residential properties to the owners of higher value homes, second homes, and residential properties not occupied by the owner, including apartments and vacant land. In FY24, the Select Board voted at the tax classification hearing to adopt a residential exemption with a 10% shift. This was a valuation credit of $142,971, which equated to $1,877.21 off your real estate tax bill. The assessor's office was then charged with the implementation of the residential exemption program. History of tax fairness. In 2001 to 2014, the town voted yearly to increase the amounts of state statutory exemptions by 100%. The state legislation informs in 2015 that this could be made permanent. The town voted in favor and made permanent. For example, if a veteran got $400, they would double it to $800. In 2004, the town voted a Community Preservation Act surcharge. Along with this came an exemption to any homeowner who could apply regardless of any age if they met the state income limits. In 2006, the tax deferral, the town voted in favor to lower the interest rates from 8% to 4%. And in 2009, the town voted to setting the income limits based on the circuit breaker limits. The town voted in favor of adopting yearly cost of living adjustments to income limits for statutory exemption clause 17D and 41C. This helps seniors with tax relief. The senior means tested exemption. In 2016, the town forms a committee to write a home rule petition to give tax relief for seniors. In 2018, the home rule petition is approved by state legislation. In 2019, the senior means tested is implemented for FY19, and this exemption would expire in 3 years. In 2020, the town petitioned state legislation to make the exemption permanent. And the Acts of 22, Chapters 193, approved and signed by our governor to put out to vote at town meeting and official election acceptance. And in 2024, the town voted and approved to make permanent. On the next slide, the valuation ranges are within $100,000 increments. Total parcel counts for FY24 is in the middle, and residential exemption granted on the third row. The break-even point is $2,145,997, and the total parcel count potential eligible is 5,616. The total exemptions granted in 2024 was $3,702 and total granted below the break-even was $3,263, and total granted above the break-even was $439.
Meredith, can you just explain what you mean by break-even in this context?
So the break-even point, anything below the break-even point would get a credit, and anything above the break-even point would pick up the burden. On the next slide, who benefits? For owner-occupied properties, eligible properties without the residential exemption program is in the first half. Property number 1 at $400,000 would have got a tax bill of $4,896, and property number 6 at $5,500,000 would get a property tax bill of $67,320. With the residential exemption, property number 1 on the second half for $400,000 would get a tax bill of $3,374.79 with a savings of $1,521.21. Property number 6 for a $5,500,000 home would have had a property tax bill of $70,337.79 with an extra cost for the exemption of $3,017.79. In the next 3 slides, I have 3 examples prepared, one below the break-even, one near the average, and one above the break-even point. The first slide is below the break-even point, value with budget impacts. In FY24, with the residential exemption, this property is a live property of $807,100. If they filed for the residential exemption and got it, their tax bill would have been $8,720. With the budgetary impacts, the tax savings for this tax bill would be $787. In the middle column, if they didn't apply, their tax bill would have been $10,597. And in the third column, if there was no residential exemption approved, their tax bill would have been $987. The next slide is near average assessed value with budgetary impacts.
Meredith, can you just, while we're on this slide, I wonder if we could look at the schedule below that. where it breaks out that $787 into the components?
So the components of the budgetary impact, the middle school debt for the $807,100 value property, the middle school debt would have been $291. The increase in assessed value was $447 was credited here, and the residential credited for this particular property of $1,158.89, and all other budget impacts $527.45, where this would be a decrease of $787.44 for this particular property.
Thank you.
The next slide, near average assessed value with budgetary impacts, is $1,506,900. If they applied for the residential exemption, their tax bill would have been $17,908. Below are the budgetary impacts, and this particular $1,506,900 property would have gotten a decrease of $551. In the middle slide, $1,506,900. If they didn't apply, their tax bill would have been $9,786, with an increase in the tax bill of $1,341. And the next column over is if we didn't have the residential value, their tax bill would have been $18,444. On the third slide is above the break-even point value with budgetary impacts. This is a home of $3,409,700. With the residential exemption, their tax bill would have been $42,892. Without the residential exemption, if they applied, would be $44,769 if they did not apply. And if it didn't act at all, it would have been $41,735. If they had applied, the increase in this tax bill would have been $6,074. And on the bottom is the budgetary impacts of the middle school, increased in assessed value, residential exemption, and all other budgets. On the next slide, many parcels saw a tax increase because the tax rate increased. Whether you were above or below the break-even point would determine if you benefited or not from the residential exemption. Total number of potential qualifying residential parcels was 5,616. 86% of parcels were below the break-even point of $2,145,997, and 14% of the parcel values were above the break-even point of $2,145,997. The total number of parcels that were granted of the residential exemption was 3,702. 88% were below the break-even, and 12% were above. On the last slide is the tax history. In 2024, the tax rate was $13.13 for residential, and the commercial, industrial, and personal was $12.24. We normally have a single tax rate. Because the residential exemption, we had the shift, it would have been $12.24, but it was $13.13 to fund the residential exemption. In 2023, the tax rate was $12.96. If you notice in 22, 21, 20, and 19, the tax rate was in the $14 range. Because in 2021, the sales generated 2023 values, after COVID, the values increased and the tax rate decreased.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.
You're well ahead of time. I'm going to open it up now to questions from the Select Board. Do we have any questions for Meredith? Anything we'd like to maybe amplify some of these slides?
I have just one. When we enacted the residential tax exemption last year, we had to make an assumption about how many applicants we would get for that residential assumption, for the residential tax exemption. Would you remind us how many we estimated versus how many actually applied?
We estimated 4,000 and 3,702 applied.
Okay. Have we been getting additional applications since the end of FY24 that didn't actually qualify in FY24?
We have a few people that didn't qualify because they bought their home after January, and now people are qualified to apply because it's their domicile.
And just a reminder, if you are qualified, you can still apply if you're amongst those other homeowners that haven't yet applied. And it would
Yes.
apply to the current tax year.
If they apply now, it will show on their third and fourth quarter if this goes through with the residential exemption. If they apply after January, it would show up after the fourth quarter.
Thank you.
Karen, do you have any questions?
So if we had less people apply and receive the exemption than what we had projected, and yet we had set the tax rate based on an assumption that there would be more exemptions granted, I'm assuming that means our projection would be for higher tax rates collection than what we had budgeted.
Right.
Do we know how much?
I believe there was like 293 that we over, so maybe around 500,000, and that would be released to free cash.
Got it. Thank you.
Meredith, what about the overlay account? It doesn't go through the overlay account?
It goes through the overlay account after January. Before that, the 4,000 was split on the tax bill. That's why the rate was 1313. It was 1312, and the penny was 1313 for the senior means tested, because that was split on the shift.
Okay, thank you.
You're
We're
welcome.
talking pennies.
I have a couple questions. So I think I know the answer to this, but if you've already applied and you got the credit this year, do you have to apply, if the select board votes to do it again, do we have to apply again?
No. You apply once, you get it, as
Okay.
long as you live in your domicile.
All right? But the select board needs to vote every year whether to do it or not. Is that
Every
correct?
year at the tax classification hearing, they
Right.
vote to approve, and the percentage as well.
Right, okay. And I'm a little bit confused about the near average slide. There's one, my house is pretty close to that, and according to this, it says that there was a 17.17% increase in the tax bill in '23? Is that really correct?
So that was the increase from 22 to 23, yes.
Because the other two properties, the below break even and the above break even, only had like a 2% tax increase.
These
that
were
year.
live examples, so some people could do additions, they could add pools, they
All
could
right.
add additions, so
I see.
they're just, live examples that I just used. So if you want me to do yours, you can email me and I can send it to you.
No. No, so this is not the average of all of them. This is one house?
Yeah.
It's just a live example.
Got it. Now I got it. Thank you.
And Terry, if you look at the column that is, or the line that is increased in assessed value, you can see that particular property had an increase in assessed value from 22 to 23 of 33%, which is why you're seeing a big increase in the property tax.
Right, I thought it was the average of all these properties. Okay, I get it. So it's one property. Thank you.
So can we assume then that this one property had some addition? This wasn't just this class of property or this neighborhood that went up by this assessed value? Can we make that assumption? That
What was the question? I'm sorry.
when we're looking at the near average assessed value, when we see that it went up by 33%, right? Can we assume that this particular property had some improvements made to it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we could do better than that. We can see that in column 22, it was $1,067,000, and then the next year it was $1,424,000.
Right, but it was because of improvements, not just because of... an analysis of that particular
No, it
neighborhood.
was just random properties
Right,
that I
right.
picked for the particular, I wanted real examples.
There's a note below it. I believe the increase in average town assessed value was 18% in '23.
Oh, yeah, good,
Okay.
great.
I know the charts are a little dense, but we'll get there.
So can I, just on the last slide, I see that for fiscal year '24, there's a different tax rate for residential versus commercial. That looks like the first year that that was enacted,
Which one, the last slide?
on the last slide.
Yep. Yep.
What is the dollar amount that was shifted from commercial onto residential taxpayers?
So commercial wasn't affected, industrial and personal property, they stayed at 1224, we would have been 1224, but it's within the residential value in class one. Within that is the 1313, it should have been 1224, but that funded the residential exemption.
Got it. So it's intended to make it even between
Right.
residential and commercial?
Right, it should just have been a single
Pre
rate
and post.
without anything.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Any other questions from the select board? I wanted to just clarify that tonight is really a listening session for us to listen to you. The actual vote on the tax rates will be held in November, when we have a tax classification hearing, which we have every single year. So every year in November, the select board, according to Mass General Law, sets the tax rates, and that's done in November. That is not happening tonight. Tonight is just for us to listen.
Mary, I have one more question
Go
for
ahead.
Meredith. So a lot of people, I think, are still confused. If your property is above the break even, you can apply,
You
right?
can still apply, and it would be less of a burden of if you didn't apply.
You still get the 1,800 or whatever
You
it is
still get the
credit.
1,877.21 off your
Right.
taxes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Are there any questions for our town assessor from the audience? And again, these questions should be focused not on policy, but on more mechanics. So if you've got questions about some of these numbers, this would be a good time to ask. Yes.
So I'm curious.
I'm sorry, could you please identify yourself?
You have
Would you go to the
that
mic, please?
microphone.
Thank you.
There are people listening on Zoom tonight, so we want to make
Plus,
sure
we
that
wanna know who
everybody
you are.
can-
Gwen Acton, 62 Elm Street. My understanding is approximately 1/3 of the units, housing units in Concord are rental units. Is that correct? Approximately.
I'm not involved in the
Because
of that.
The data would say it's about 25%.
about 25%.
Yes.
So about 1/4
Yes.
of the households in Concord are rental units. Is there a reason why in all of this presentation that you did, that there was no mention of 1/4 of the people who, the units within Concord?
So anybody that rents doesn't get a chance to apply for a residential exemption. That's why they weren't talked about, because they don't have the opportunity to get it. The landlord would, not the renter.
Correct. Well, the landlord can't apply,
If he lives there, he can.
but not for the rental unit.
Which
Not
is
for
not the
rental.
definition of
Right,
rental.
so they do not qualify, and so the impact, we're looking here at just the impact on homeowners, we're not looking at all at the impact on renters, is that correct?
Well, the impact would be whatever the lease they have. Some homeowners may, pick that up, whatever the lease qualifies, whatever they decide to in the future. I wouldn't know.
We weren't, just to clarify, since this is about assessments, we didn't at all talk about the impact on the rental unit tax due. That was not at all in your,
That's
I wouldn't
correct,
know
and
what it
I-
would be.
I
That's
would-
why it's not in there.
And I would just like to remind people that if we've got questions about the slides, this is the appropriate time to ask
it
Meredith.
is
But if
about
it's
the
a
slides, but
policy,
they weren't-
if it's a policy question,
Sure.
would you hold that until
Sure.
later?
Just
And that, I
point-
think, is a good,
The question was, why weren't they included?
That's
the
an
impact,
appropriate-
because they were impacted.
That's an
and they
appropriate
weren't.
policy question. Please save that. Stefan?
Thank you. Stephan Bader, 7 River Street. Looking at the slide with the house and the summary statistics, the 86%, 88%, 14, 12, those seem pretty close to me. But if you look at the parcels that were granted as opposed to the ones that qualified in the below break-even point, about 2/3 of the parcels qualified, just based on these numbers. Whereas the more expensive parcels, it looked like 56% qualified. So just as a matter of background, do you have any sense of why the more expensive parcels were less likely to qualify or less likely to apply? Did they not know? Were they missing information, or are
We've
more
put
expensive?
everything out publicly at the bridge, on our website. We've had Council on Aging seminars. We have put it in everybody's tax bill. If they don't want to apply, that's not up to us to make that decision.
I guess my real question is there any sense of the more expensive parcels, are they more likely to be held in ownership structures that wouldn't qualify?
I don't know that answer.
Okay.
Steph, I do know there are quite a few people in this group that did not apply, that would have qualified, but they didn't understand that they could apply. They thought if they were above break even, they weren't going to get any credit. So that's why I asked Meredith the question that I did, and hopefully this year, everyone who qualifies, which means you're an owner and you live there,
So,
everybody should apply,
yeah, okay.
That it's their domicile and not their second home.
right?
So there could be a whole slew of $6 million second homes in Concord? Is that
There
possible?
could be. There could be a builder building one and he wouldn't get it. Right.
I'm sorry.
If a builder was building a home, he wouldn't live in that home, so
Okay,
he
so under
wouldn't get it or she
construction.
wouldn't get it. Yeah, things of that nature.
Wouldn't call it a slew.
Hi, Chris Reynolds, 15 Captain Miles Lane. You have the slides where you showed individual examples of the amounts, with and without the exemption. Do you know what the total amount that was transferred to the 14% above the break even? How much property tax was borne by that group within the town versus what they would have had the year before?
If you email me, I can research it, but I don't have that right at.
You don't have the total amount?
No.
Okay, can we look at the slide, the same one that Terry was asking about? I have a question on one of your calculations.
Is this
The
the
near
slide you
average.
want, Chris?
The near
Yeah.
average?
No.
No, the near
No,
average
the one
one.
that, it
Oh,
was
right.
Terry's example.
It's in this packet.
Near average
Okay.
is-
There you go.
Yeah,
That's it,
this
that's
one is
it.
fine.
Yep.
So on the bottom box, the second line, it says increased assessed value, and it shows as a negative. So why does increased assessed value reduce the tax bill?
Because they filed for the residential exemption. And
But
they
isn't
got
that in the
credit.
line below?
So which one, the negative 298 or the 550?
No, I'm looking at, there's a negative 1663,
Yeah.
and then there's a negative 536.
Those are showing the credited of, at the end, it's 551.
Yeah, right, but the assessed value went up, right? It went from 1,000,004 to 1,000,005. So how does that save you money in your tax bill? I don't get the math.
I think that what we're looking at is the adjusted assessed value compared to the prior year.
Yes.
I
So
think
the
it's,
1363 versus the prior year of 1424.
Yes,
it's because the tax rate went down.
yes.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah. That's why there's a different number with and without the exception.
Hi, Meredith. My name is Glenn Gutwillig. I met you last year. First of all, thanks for doing a great job as the town assessor.
Thank you.
Quick question. It looks like, depending on these examples, the percent increase last year, ranged differently with different property values. We're in a time nationally where real estate supply is constrained. I don't think Concord is any different. Don't have as many units on the market as we typically do. in 25, this is all 23 over 24 data, we're in fiscal 25 now.
Right.
What do you think it's going to look like, if you can say, in fiscal 25 in terms of average percent increase? And do you have more data because sales are increasing in Concord? I don't know if they are, but do you have more, as an assessor, do you have more data to?
So right now, we're in the process of doing valuations for FY25, so we have not been certified. We're in the process, but I don't see it increasing more than 4 to 5%.
So you think that's about the average of what we saw last year versus like an 18% increase
Right.
the year before?
Well, the sales generate, when the sales are very high, this generates that. And usually the tax rate lowers, but because of the residential exemption, it did increase, and that's where the shift, where it's 1313 instead of 1224.
Okay. I mean, the reason I ask, you know, and Mark Howell, for example, our city selectman, is a neighbor of mine. We live on the same street.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank
You know, the reason I ask is, you know, when you assess, you look at properties that are similar to yours in similar neighborhoods and so forth. But there are so few properties for sale, and if one new house sells at a much higher rate than all of the other houses on the street, you know, it could skew the values in a whole area.
We just don't use one house. We use many houses. It's a mass appraisal, not individual appraisal. And we have a valuation company along with the Department of Revenue will not let me certify anything if it's not in line and fair and equitable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I can also add, as far as a heads up for the FY25 taxes, that in addition to what Meredith addressed as far as valuations, I think this year, Carrie, please correct me if I'm wrong, we're not expecting middle school debt to come on board this fiscal year.
There's no additional middle school debt coming on
This year.
in fiscal 25.
So that will give us a breather from,
But it'll come on the year after.
it will, but we were asking in FY25. Okay, Meredith, I want to thank you. People don't know this, but we've got a really outstanding assessor and her staff, and to implement the residential tax exemption was a huge lift.
Yep.
And she did a great job. So I just want to take this minute to
Thank you
acknowledge the
very
work in your.
much.
Thank you, Meredith.
And if anybody wants to, thank you. And if anybody wants to email me, come in, you know, call me, and you want a budget breakdown of your own, feel free. I'm there every day.
Thank you, Meredith. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor up to comments. Please try to restrict your comments to 3 minutes. We've got a timer. He's pretty strict. And we're open to anything that you want to, we want to hear from you. So who would like to start?
And if you're on Zoom and you have a comment or a question, please raise your hand and we'll take some online questions as well.
Hi, good evening. Cameron McKenna, 64 Nut Meadow Crossing. I am a member of the Concord Select Board, but was not part of the RTE vote last year, and I'm speaking on my own behalf. I will start with full disclosure. There are 2 McKenna homeowners in Concord, my parents, who benefited from the RTE by $1,085, and myself and my wife, who paid an extra $384. So a net gain of $701 for the family. To provide some context, last year the Concord Select Board chose to pass an RTE without conducting a detailed analysis. Other than Concord, the RTE has been adopted by a mix of towns where most housing is seasonal, thereby shifting higher taxes to second home vacation properties, or cities with a large percent of renters and a smaller than average difference between renter and homeowner income. In other words, they are looking to address issues that do not apply to Concord. To provide some outside perspective, both the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center and the town of Lexington, in their thoroughly documented RTE study, warn that RTEs can be regressive, meaning they hurt those with lower incomes more than they help. When Lexington rejected their RTE, one of the key conclusions was that when considering all types of residential properties and their occupants, the RTE is in fact regressive. This has in fact played out in Concord. The data shows that the Concord RTE negatively impacts more households than it helps,
negatively impacts renters and those who own below average homes more than it helps, and provides tax benefits to more than 900 households that own above average homes. The RTE is a mechanism to redistribute who pays what, creating winners, those who benefit from a reduction in their taxes owed, and losers, those who have to pay more to cover the winners. With 7,300 total housing units in Concord per the 2020 census, let's take a look in more detail at the winners and losers. In the winners column, you have 3,263 households that receive the RTE at the below the break-even line. This includes 2,330 homes that were valued below the Concord average of $1.4 million, along with 933 homes that were valued at $1.4 to $2.1 million. That means that 29% of the households receiving the tax benefit own above average homes. If you own a $2 million home in Concord and you make millions of dollars per year in income, congratulations, you get a tax benefit. Now let's look at the losers. There are roughly 4,000 housing units that lose out as a result of the Concord RTE. These include 1,700 rental households and 1,200 housing units that are valued at less than the average Concord home of $1.4 million and did not receive the RTE, with the remaining 1,100 losers being households above $1.4 million that did not receive the RTE and those above the RTE break-even. What does that mean? It means 71% of the housing units that are hurt are renters and those with homes worth less than average. So to summarize, for renters and those who own below average homes, that's 2,300 winners and 2,900 losers. If you wanted to provide relief for people who can least afford it, it's a simple fact, you'd be better off having a random lottery. Meanwhile, you are providing tax breaks to more than 900 housing units that own above average homes, while increasing taxes on others according to an arbitrary definition of fairness. And I'm not sure I understand the logic behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. No, sorry. No. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask. This is a business meeting. This is a select board meeting. I'm going to have to ask you to refrain from any type of applause or booing or anything. We're here to listen. Listen respectfully. Thank you.
My name is Denise Gilbert. I live at Concord Green, Building 5, Unit 6. I'm a resident and homeowner for 22 years. First, I'd like to thank the Concord community for voting positively for the residential tax exemption last year. It was a much appreciated ease for myself and for others who love and contribute in many ways to our town. It is my hope that this program will continue, and I'll admit I'm kind of lost in the numbers and the figures, but I will work hard to understand it better. As a retired public school teacher, I voted for expansion and renewal of the public school. I believe in paying my fair share and providing the best education possible for our students. The residential tax program made the payment for myself and others in moderately priced residences in Concord possible. Many of us contribute to this community in volunteer work, which includes Emerson Hospital, Green Thumbs, Open Table, Council on Aging, school volunteers, and much more. It would be heartbreaking to lose residents who could no longer afford to live in this community because of tax strain. What would that say about our town if many of us who love and contribute to Concord must anticipate moving out? Let us expand our vision of diversity and inclusion by taking action. I ask that we retain this program in perpetuity. It will not be taken for granted and will be wholeheartedly appreciated.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert.
John Garoppolo, Coolidge Road, member of the Finance Committee, but speaking on my behalf. We have 2 children in high school. We raised our kids here and thought we were going to be here forever. And I want to say, after this was implemented, we actively are looking on what are we going to do after our kids leave? You've made it difficult for us in this arbitrary fashion. But I do want to say I think you've done a really great job of making friends and probably gaining support, since 12% of us are funding the other 88%. It's almost like you're literally buying votes, and I worry about what are you going to do, or anyone else running for the select board, can they just say, I'm going to keep the RTE, increase the RTE? It's almost creating like two classes of citizens, where some can vote for any spending they want because they know that other people will cover more of that, and it's having a real negative impact. And I think it's also important that members of the select board that directly benefit from this should disclose that to the community, because you are voting and pushing this through, and the town doesn't vote, you didn't run any surveys, and yet you also financially benefit directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garofalo. No, we'll stay with the floor.
My name is Kristen Haggerty. I'm on Revolutionary Road. I wanted to say I'm in favor of the residential tax exemption and every other opportunity that you have to create more equitable access to being in Concord. I want to say that I listened to all of the meetings that you had discussed. There was considerable amount that the board looked into, that there was public input solicited. There was a great deal of publicity around having people participate. So, you know, when folks come in after the fact and say, we didn't hear, or you didn't, you know, we weren't able to participate in the process, we hear that pretty regularly when you're on boards and committees. So I heard, I listened, and I think a lot of other people did. The last thing I would just say is that for all of my fellow residents, I hope that we're able to consider everybody, because we're part of a larger community, above just our own interests. That's what makes it a special place to be. It shouldn't be pitting winners and losers. We're all part of the community. We all benefit together when we can look outside of our own interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haggerty.
I'm Gwen Acton, and 62 Elm Street, and I've spent a lot of time, I downloaded the numbers from who was winning, or who was benefiting, who was paying more as a result of these. I spent a lot of time analyzing these numbers. I really want the select board to appreciate, when you're talking about diversity, 1/4 of the units in Concord are rental units. We are shifting a lot of the tax burden to the rental units. And I would really like us to think about inclusion and diversity. If that is our goal, a lot of the rental units are disproportionately at the lower end of the valuations, from my understanding of it. What this translates into is that a $500,000 rental unit is subsidizing a $2 million homeowner. That's how this translates, because the $500,000 unit is paying more than they would otherwise. The $2 million homeowner is paying less. So when we're talking about diversity, when we're talking about inclusion, we have to think not just of the homeowners, but of the 25% of rental units. We don't know exactly how that's being translated, but I think we have to reasonably expect that we know that those units are paying more in taxes. So as we are thinking about inclusion, I think renters are less apt to show up to a meeting like this. I do think we have to think about the folks in town who are renters. $500,000 rental unit is subsidizing somebody in a $2 million house. I also just want to speak personally. The single biggest factor that is driving our thinking about moving is our tax rate, right? Our house did not. Our house has gone up in value, and there are many people in houses where their values went up. Also, to assume that just because somebody's in a more expensive house, that they have more ability to pay higher taxes is that doesn't make any sense, right? And finally, my trying to remember my last point. But anyway, I do hope the select board, because Concord has not done the thorough analysis that Lexington, is a town very similar to us. We have not done that thorough analysis. Lexington, that did do that analysis, decided not to do this because, as Cameron McKinnon so aptly said, this is a regressive tax. There's not a means test.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Acton.
Ellen Quackenbush, 206 Prairie Street. I'm actually the poster child for page 6 of Meredith's report because my house is just about $800,000. I did get a $1,200 tax rebate or 11%. I'm not going to talk about renters. I'm not going to talk about everything people talked about because I'm a little bit confused, but I'm going to talk about an article in the Concord Bridge. I was truly dismayed by an article at the Concord Bridge in which they cited as a reason to discontinue this exemption the example of a senior living in a high-value home who does not qualify for the exemption while handing out breaks to residents who may not need them. While I agree that using a house value alone as a criterion for tax exemption is a bit of a blunt instrument, I'm willing to bet, I'll put money in this, that people who needed an exemption more often got one than were denied one. I believe the more typical example of a homeowner who would need an exemption is a young couple, both working 5-figure, not 6-figure salaries. For example, teacher, healthcare worker, safety officer, or Concord town employee. I have 2 such couples in my neighborhood. I think they can afford to live in Concord because they live in their parents' or their grandparents' homes. These are the people that the tax exemption should be aimed at. If we want diversity in ages, young people versus senior citizens, income just making it versus quite comfortable, and background, new to town versus longtime residents, we need to look beyond the blunt instrument of house value. The current residential tax exemption form already collects the required information. Parcel ID, that's your house value. 1040, which I know is meant to prove that the property is your primary residence, but it does have, potentially has income. Therefore, if anyone, and it doesn't have to be a senior, please, who has a house worth more than $1.3 million and feels that they cannot afford their property taxes, why don't we ask them to submit their 1040 along with their parcel ID? The town could then establish a sliding income to house value scale to determine what percentage of the exemption that household would receive. I know that's not what you did, but think about it. Would that be entirely fair? No. I know people who live in low value houses who have quite a bit of income. But unless you ask everyone to submit their 1040 annually and their parcel ID, it's never going to be entirely fair. I would just say, bottom line, don't throw out the exemption just because of the frankly rare scenario outlined in the Concord Bridge. Instead, give people with high value homes the opportunity to submit their income along with their parcel ID and have some sort of a scale that will allow them to have a percentage of the exemption and use this tool, which is a much needed tool to promote economic diversity in town.
Thank you, Ms. Quackenbush. I'm going to go online, and I see 1 hand raised. I see 2 hand raised. I'm going to start with Ms. Galis.
Hello, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. My comment or question has to do with renters. I do not see that there is any data that proves that the renters are paying more as a result of this policy. And if there is research done and one finds out that the property owners are raising the rents because of it, well, maybe we could implement a measure to counter that. I mean, it doesn't have to be as restrictive as rent control, but we could think along those lines. And I also think that the arguments made that people who live in more expensive homes are paying more. From what I understand, they are not. They are also getting a tax break if they apply for the policy, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Galis. I see another hand.
Mike Mahoney.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yep, hi. First of all, I'd like to take the time to thank the Select Board for supporting the residential tax exemption in Concord. It makes a huge difference for those that need it most. As a resident of Concord, I believe this initiative is essential for enhancing the quality of life for our families and fostering a more equitable environment. In recent years, we've seen a significant rise in property taxes, which has placed an increased burden on many, particularly those on fixed incomes and young families trying to establish roots in Concord. Through continued support of the residential tax exemption, we can alleviate some of the pressure, allowing residents to invest in their homes and neighborhoods rather than struggling to meet the rising costs. I'd like to share with you that I'm a realtor and work extensively with clients throughout Greater Boston, including many in Concord.
Uh-oh, Mr. Mahoney, you froze. We'll come back to you.
I can tell that having a... Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you, Mr. Mahoney. Can you back up maybe 30 seconds or 15 seconds
Yeah.
because you cut out?
Okay, so in recent years, we've seen did you get that part before or not?
You said you were a realtor working with many families.
Okay, so I would like to share with you that I'm a realtor and work extensively with clients throughout Greater Boston, including many in Concord. I can tell you from personal experience that having a residential tax exemption in place can make the difference between being able to remain in Concord as well as being an incentive for new families to move into our area. Which contributes to a vibrant, diverse community. A more affordable housing market can lead to increased home ownership rates, fostering stability and long-term investment in our neighborhoods. Many will say that the difference in taxes will not determine whether a person can afford Concord or not. I can tell you as a real estate professional that it absolutely does. When a person is qualifying for a mortgage, the key factors that go into the calculation of whether they're qualified or not are principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, otherwise known as PITI or PITI. For somebody that's on the cusp of being able to afford in Concord or not, taxes can make the difference between qualifying for the mortgage or not qualifying. There's no such concern, there is so much concern rather these days that, and rightfully so, around the lack of affordable housing and that more needs to be done to ease the situation. This will only help. I understand that many will say that there are homeowners.
Mr. Mahoney, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up, please. Can you wrap it up?
I'm almost done.
Okay.
That are house rich and cash poor. While this to some extent may be true, it does not hold true for most homeowners who own multi-million-dollar homes. I'll leave it at that. I mean, I think it's important, and I fully support it, and thank you for your continued support.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. Okay, I'll back to the floor.
Hi, Joe Lauren, Southfield Road in Concord. I find it interesting. I actually think there's a common thread when I listen to folks argue on both sides of this. There's a common thread that a recognition that we have folks here who can't afford to pay higher taxes, and a common theme that we want to be able to help those people. I believe, oh, sorry. That was really important. Did everybody hear that?
Do you want to back up?
I do think there's this common theme, right? That we recognize there are folks here in town who cannot afford ever-increasing taxes, and a common theme that we want to help those people. I believe that the RT is not the right solution, unfortunately. When it was first discussed last year, I called it a blunt instrument. What I mean by that, and the point's been made both ways here tonight, is that we need something that's more refined, that actually takes into account someone's ability to pay, not just based on the value of their home. And I would have to disagree with the gentleman who just spoke. I believe there are people who've been living here for years and years. We've all seen our homes increase in value over the years. Even if you haven't done anything to the home, the values have increased. Last year, during all of this, a long-term resident emailed me and told me that she and her husband both retired. Their home was above the median, above the break point, where they were going to get hit with added taxes, and they were literally going to move out of Concord because they could not afford the taxes here any longer. Lifelong residents, and it was just because real estate values have gone up that pushed them to this point. And a point she made is, I can't sell my garage to raise cash to pay these taxes, right?
A lot of folks have high-valued homes, and it does not mean they have an ability to pay extremely high taxes. On the other hand, someone in my neighborhood last year sold their home for well over $2 million, and moved to a condo here in Concord, and actually got a tax break. Now, they reaped the benefit of selling that multi-million-dollar home, but now because they own a smaller condo, they downsized because their kids went off to college, they're getting a big benefit from this. My point is, yes, we want to give folks a break. This is not the instrument. We need something that's more detailed and actually assesses someone's ability to pay. Thank you.
I have to say, I thank you for that. I really appreciated finding common ground. But I just want to make a point here again that I made in my opening remarks. We're limited to the things that are available to us through Mass General Law. So I've heard several people talk about things that we could do to customize or tweak, but we are limited. So I just want to...
Fair enough. And I argued that we should look at the senior tax exemption and modify that, and I understand that's very difficult. I understand we have few options, but this is a big deal. It's worth looking at some additional options, is the point I would make.
It's a fair point. Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
Mark Martinez, 66 Alfred Circle. I'm a member of the Economic Vitality Committee speaking on my own behalf tonight. I'd like to take a broader perspective, raise this up a little bit, and show, I think, that regulation in many cases drives behavior. So I'm going to share with you 7 numbers: 30%, 60%, followed by 5 zeros. 30% is the amount that the town budget has increased or will increase over 6 years. In 2019, it was $109 million. In 2025, it's slated to be $140. There are no signs of it slowing down. Secondly, 60%. 60% is what percent the town anticipates real estate taxes will rise for all of us, regardless of what your house is valued at, over the next 6 years. So we were warned at town meeting, and the Finance Committee has warned us multiple times, talking about 6 years at 8% a year. So if your taxes are $30,000, they'll be close to $50,000 in 6 years. All right, now my 5 zeros. First zero, the town, including the select board, has taken 0 action items, initiated 0 committees or studies to either increase revenue or decrease expenses. In fact, the select board last year rejected our pleas to form a study committee. It appears this year that rejection continues. Second zero, there is no data to show that the RT has made Concord more affordable. In fact, it looks like the exact opposite. If you think about the artificial subsidy being handed out to lower assessed homes, the market is going to adjust and increase those homes, thereby evaporating that artificially low assessment. Third zero, the number of towns around Concord who have an RTE, who are similar to Concord. Fourth zero, there's no means test or income tax to determine who gets or needs tax relief. In my last zero, there is 0 chance town spending in the future will level off or decrease. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I'm going to stay on the floor.
Hi, I'm Connie Levine, 149 Stowe Street.
Ms. Levine.
And I wanted to talk first about the rentals because I'm a real estate agent, and renters never get a residential option, nor should they, because the person who owns that property is investing in it to make money. And so it's not the same as a person owning a house. And landlords can either pass it to the tenant based on an escalation clause in the lease, or if it's longer than 1 year, or they can just roll it into the upping of the lease the following year. So I'm not sympathetic for having any kind of residential exemptions for rentals. That's unheard of anywhere that I've ever operated, and I've been in real estate 23 years. So anyway, that's that. And as far as the residential exemption goes, I think it's a great thing to do. A lot of people were able to take care of it, you know, and take the benefit of it. Some didn't know, but hopefully they'll know this year. And it does make a big difference. I mean, I bought a house, a three-bedroom Cape in 1989 for $350,000 across from Emerson Playground, and now it was assessed last year at $1.6 million. And I've basically done nothing to the house in the way of expanding it. So it goes to show you how somebody who's lived there a long time can get a giant tax bill now just by virtue of living across, and it's the land value. You know, they jack the land value up, and they jack mine up almost by extra money because it's across from Emerson Field, which is a playground. You know, you would think it was like, you know, some beautiful park, but it's basically Emerson Playground. If you look at the town card, that's what it says. So I think it's good because it helped out a lot of people that are somehow stuck in the middle. And, you know, if someone wants to buy a new house now, the new construction, they're all above $2 million practically. So, you know, it is what it is. But I think it's helped a lot of people in Concord to stay in Concord. And I think it was a very good idea of the select board to do it and to continue with it too.
Thank you.
Paul Moore, Blueberry Lane. The RTE has no basis in economic reality. Other towns that have adopted similar measures have done so to alleviate the tax burden on part-year residents who consume no town services for several months out of the year. But Concord is not Cape Cod. We are not a vacation town. Nor is there any reason why some residents should pay disproportionately higher taxes than others, or any reason why others should somehow be disproportionately more deserving of a tax break. The flat residential property tax rate has worked very well for thousands of towns across the country, including the neighboring towns around us. Taxing people disproportionately is divisive. Concord deserves better. What we're hearing is just how complicated trying to implement an RTE fairly really is. The RTE was presented as an application, but used as a survey to suggest that respondents approved of a new tax structure. This is false. The financial analysis that we used as a basis of approval for this measure omitted the impact of the RTE, even though it had previously been discussed. Some of us were feeling misled. Even though I benefited from the RTE, I am opposed to it on principle, because after the wealthy people have been driven out of Concord and their property values have fallen, you will have to reach further down the economic ladder until you're punishing the people in the middle. It is worth remembering that many times wealthy people got that way by building companies that created thousands of jobs and benefited millions of customers. The American system is the most powerful motivational system in the world, for which millions of immigrants have risked everything just to get here. 180 years ago, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in a pulpit a few hundred yards over there, preached the virtues of independence and self-reliance. If you want to help people, promote freedom and opportunity. In summary, the RTE is divisive, based on a misapplication, parasitic, and should be repealed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yanis Tsitsas, 33 Brook Trail Road, Concord, Mass. I'm a member of the Board of Assessors. I was a previous member of the Board of CHDC. I've been a Concord resident for over 20 years. And I'm a realtor as well. So here a couple points. I'm also a realtor as well. Here
You're speaking for yourself, not for the board?
No, I'm talking about myself. I'm speaking on my own.
Good.
As far as Lexington, a couple facts. Any property that's over 3 units is considered commercial. Okay? So for Lexington, the commercial rate is 24.2, where the residential rate is 12.25. We have the same tax rate for commercial as well as residential. So, I mean, if I heard correct, you're telling us that we should increase the commercial tax rate and bring it to Lexington, so then we can equal the studies as far as how is that affected the rentals. So that's one question I have. I don't think the math work because if you want to make it, if you want to compare equals to equals, you have to use the tax rates in all the analysis, number one. Number two, as a town, is another fact. We are the only towns we have a senior means, a tax exemption, as well as a residential, both of them, in the state of Massachusetts. I think, well, I'm a pro, I agree, and we should continue it. So I don't understand where the numbers came as far as how the rentals over here are affected. And I'll tell another thing. We have a lot of people living in Concord that they are permanent residents and they own home. But those people at the same time, they don't have a saying as far as other stuff that happens to town because they cannot vote. So that's another issue which we have, which is a huge issue because they have no saying as far as our schools, they have no saying as far as other stuff because they're not US citizens. So I think we should look into that. If you want to be fair as a town, we have to be fair to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bates.
Susan Bates, Concord Green.
Speak louder.
Oh, Susan Bates, there we go.
There you go.
28 Concord Green. There's a lot of numbers flying around here, and I have some questions about it. One is the number of rental units, and I'm not sure how that's determined, but I know the select board talked about this a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, and then at that time, the number of rental units was 900, which is not it's not 25% of the housing of the people here. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the elephant in the room is the tax rate is not just because the town spends willy-nilly. The tax rate includes excluded debt. Excluded debt is for capital projects that you have to vote in town meeting and at the polls to pass. So we all are part of that decision. And that is in addition to the property tax rate. There's excluded debt. In the current situation, I understand that in 2026, the middle school debt will roll on kind of it'll be a big impact compared to next year. The price of that school, the excluded debt is, it was estimated a few months ago anyway, to be $1,000 for average homeowner, $1,000 a year for 30 years for one building. And not only that, but that excluded debt doubles the excluded debt that we already have, which is a number of different projects in other schools. So I think that when you talk about increasing tax rate, you have to pare it down and kind of tease out what is it that's really going up. And what's going up is the excluded debt, particularly for schools, in a declining enrollment. And then there are a lot of people, like a gentleman that spoke earlier who said he had 2 kids in high school and didn't know if they could afford to live here. That's what happens. People take advantage of the education, then see ya. So I think it's more complicated than just the tax rate itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Anyone on Zoom?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Mr. Dane.
Thank you. Henry Dane, 58 Everett Street. I think I played a significant role in the origination of this proposal. And I've had people make very emotional comments to me about it. People have hurled obscene epithets at me because they thought that it was unfair, even though they were very wealthy people. There are other people who told me, people said they were throwing flowers at my feet because they could finally afford to stay in Concord, that they could pay their medical bills, they could pay their veterinary bills. They didn't have to move out of town. We are, because of our economic structure, we are paying some of our best people to move out of town because their values and their equity in their homes has increased, and so it makes sense for them to sell. And as we raise the cost of taxes for them to stay here, it makes sense economically for them to go. They don't want to go into assisted living. They don't want to move into an apartment. They don't want to go into public housing. They don't want to move in with their children, who, by the way, can't afford to live here either. So this has really been, I think, well, go back. There's some things that have been stated here as facts, which have as little evidence as the arguments that are being contested. For instance, I don't think there's any evidence that rents have gone up. Maybe the costs to landlords have increased, but the amount of rent that is charged by a landlord is not based on the landlords in residential property by their expenses. It's a result of what the market will bear. And any landlord will charge whatever they think tenants are able to pay. So I'm not sure that's a very persuasive argument, and especially having that argument come not from people who are tenants, but from people who live in multi-million-dollar homes who are then crying poor about the people who live in rental housing. It is true that this is, as what one person said, and I have repeatedly said, this is a blunt instrument. Government is a blunt instrument. You make rules that are applied to a lot of situations, and many of the situations or assumptions just don't apply. So you look at, as Mary has said, you look at what is available. And the options, we don't have any option to have an income-based system of taxation at the town level. It would be difficult of implementation if we could, but we don't have it. So I think it's important that many people who have lived in this town for generations and this is important to support people, many seniors, long-term residents, and other people of modest income who live in lower value homes, who are part of the culture and history of this town and have made it what it is. And they and their children may be able to continue to live here among us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dane. I'm going to move to the Zoom for a minute. Mark Moody. Mr. Moody, are you still with us?
Can you unmute?
Mr. Moody? We'll come back. Elizabeth Moore.
Hi, good evening. Elizabeth Moore, 105 Blueberry Lane. Our home has personally benefited from the exemption, and it was nice to get last year.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, can you speak up and speak a little bit slowly, please? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I said Elizabeth Moore, 105 Blueberry Lane. Our household benefited from the exemption last year, and it was nice to get that little bit of money, less to pay. But I am morally opposed to the RTE concept in general, as in my heart, I feel like it is truly robbing Peter to pay Paul. It doesn't target those in need, and it causes another form of economic divisiveness between neighbors. I think it goes completely against what your core values are. The RTE model the model that we chose was not even intended for the type of town we have. I keep hearing that you don't have options, that our options are limited. But I'd like to suggest 4 options that, although I haven't vetted them legally, that pop into my mind as I think about this. One of them is to use a different model to calculate the RTE, and that requires analysis. And I know we keep hearing that that hasn't been done, but I would highly encourage it, because what I'm hearing even when Meredith was speaking about the numbers, she couldn't answer the basic question of how much money have we transferred from these high-income households to the low-income households? I mean, these are basic questions. We need analysis to see if what we're doing is the right thing to be doing. Maybe we do it based on age, or maybe we change it and base it on income-house ratios, or the length of time you've lived in town. There's a gazillion different ways to slice and dice this. The other thing that I think hasn't been mentioned is that we are getting ready to sell Peabody. And from what I heard, it's about $18 million. And I asked this about 4 years ago. I said, will Peabody be tied to offset some of the debt because of the Concord Middle School? I personally believe that when the bond is due for 2026, I think that you should use the Peabody sale proceeds to offset that bond sale and keep our taxes as they are. I've even thought about a warrant to require that. Can you hear me still?
No.
Yes.
Okay, I would also consider charging developers, and particularly the Peabody developers, a fee, if it is legal, that is specific to offsetting property taxes. We don't have the roads to be able to provide what you're trying to do with housing. We have 18,000 people in this town, and you want to add, 8,000 more people. We can't support it. Our new middle school holds less people than the current one does. You can plunk affordable housing in and plunk people into it, but if they require 20, 30 years for us to support them, we're not getting taxes from that. That's not a new revenue stream, and that's a big expense.
Ms. Moore, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, please.
Anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
But I do think we need more analysis. I'm getting the sense that the select board had a lot of questions about the numbers. I think there needs to be a lot more homework done and a lot more analysis, and I think transparency is important. And I'm very disturbed by what I saw in the past, where numbers were provided to us that we voted on.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Thank you, Ms. Moore. I'm going to go to the floor.
Thank you.
Mark Hill, 107 Westford Road. As I'm listening to this tonight, it seems like there's a finite pie that's being divvied up.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yeah,
We're
I think
having a lot
it
of
feels
trouble.
like there's a finite pie trying to be divvied up here. I think that the town should put together a study and go out and find corporate residents to come in.
I'm sorry?
The tax base is too low from the standpoint of corporations.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing.
I'm having trouble understanding you, and I want to hear you. So can you just rewind?
Oh, apologies.
That's okay.
My hope was that perhaps the town would put together a study group to bring in clean, shall we say, very profitable corporations to take on the burden. The burden here is being decided by a finite pool. Let's not do that to ourselves. Let's basically bring it, and the good thing about corporations today is you can have a big, big tax base with a small number of employees. You could be 50 or 60 sitting in a building making millions and millions of dollars and paying big tax rates. I think to a degree that that's the way to go. You're sitting here bickering with each other. This is a wonderful town. And the thing that's great about the assets here is you have a lot of people that are ex-CEOs, things like that, who could put together a committee, go out and sell Concord. And I'm not talking about putting up all sorts of things that will take away the charm of Concord, but bring in some money. I lived in Westlake, Texas, one of the great examples of a great municipality. It was a new city, and they brought in, 25 years ago, a corporation came in, and we were a little bit nervous about it. It was a beautiful building, and it was the Johnson family from Fidelity. Came all the way out to Texas. And they plopped down, and they started what became a great, great relationship between corporations, clean corporations, and the communities. So we're sitting here trying to, it's a finite pie. It doesn't make sense. Waltham's out there right now, and it glows at night. And I'm not saying we should be Waltham, but we can be a little bit of Lexington, and this whole thing can go away. All right, let's go out and get that money. We're so blessed with biotech here and technology, and it isn't that many employees. I just heard the number 4,000 or 8,000 people. We're not talking about that. They'll be in the woods. Greenwich, Connecticut has done that for years and years. And then we're not sitting here. We're probably doing something else tonight. So I think, Mary, you said to a degree, is how do you find a compromise? It's not our fight. Just go get these corporations, bring them in, have them be good citizens, and let them pay the burden. And if Mark Martinez is saying that basically we're on this swirl of increases, so be it. Just have them pay for it. We're doing the wrong thing here. We're fishing in a shallow pond. Let's go get that deep money that's in Boston. Put together a committee. This town has so many gracious people that probably could do that. They're very powerful people. And Concord's a great name, great corporate name. How could it not be? So that's what we should be doing and not bickering. And I'm happy to be involved. I saw it work very well in Greenwich, Connecticut as a child in the New York area. And Westlake, Texas brought in the Johnson family. They were, where did they come from? So we wouldn't have this meeting, folks. There's too much money out there, and we're too much goodwill in this town could be destroyed by things like this. Let's think bigger, put together a committee. This is a very sophisticated town with very sophisticated people. This is a powerful town. Let's go use some of that might to go get some of that money, and then we could go for drinks instead of doing this. Okay?
Thank you.
You want to try Mark Moody?
I'm going to try Mark Quirky. I'm going to try Mr. Moody again. Mr. Moody, you have your hand up online. Are you still with us? What'd you say? Oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
He's gone. Okay, well. Mr. Booth.
Court Booth, 144 Wright Road. I do favor the RTE. I am sensitive to the criticisms. I think some of them are worthy of our consideration. I think the claim that folks haven't done their homework is something that we might want to reconsider, because I think this is part of the homework you're doing, part of the study you're doing, and I appreciate that. I want to share with you one family's math in regard to this, the way we think in our house. We put 2 kids through the public schools here. And when I look at my tax bill, which I think I now benefit to the tune of about $80 thanks to the RTE, when I look at my tax bill and I look at my per pupil costs for putting my 2 children in school, I pay in a given year about half what it costs to put 1 child through these schools. 2 kids, that means ideally I live here 48 years, pay my taxes, and most of those years are years where I'm not putting kids in school. Many of those years are post me parenting, and I'm in my retirement years with a fixed income, but still paying the taxes, still living here. And I honestly believe the $80 in the savings that I have, regressive though it may be in the opinion of some people, does keep a stability in this town with taxpayers like me that I think overall benefits the town and benefits the households that still have kids in school. In effect, what I'm saying is keep me around and I'll keep paying for the other kids because they need help. It's expensive.
Thank you, Mr. Booth.
I must be shorter than a number of my prior speakers.
Okay.
It's funny. I wasn't going to speak. Oh, sorry. David Mayer, 350 Main Street. I wasn't going to say anything or speak just because there's enough people more informed probably than I am. Excuse me. But in my second point, I'll speak to why I stood up. Again, I'm not going to claim to have all the facts or the data on all these things. I guess my own perspective is, we've been living in Concord for 10 years. Excuse me. Our home has gone up a lot since we bought it, which I guess is great. I can tell you for sure, if I was shopping for a new house today, I wouldn't be looking to buy anything close to what ours is worth right now. It wouldn't even be an option to consider. Property values, in theory, going up for all of us should be a good thing. But there's this unintended tax bill that goes up with it that, I'll be honest with you, 10 years ago, when I was starting a family and moved here, bought a house, the last thing I was thinking about in terms of what was going to make my life affordable every year was my property taxes. And we've just gone through this thing. And again, I'm just going to try to be very simple spoken on this. Like, no one is going to want to take away benefit from those with either lesser value homes or on a fixed income or whatever. No one in good conscience is ever going to want to not help that group. The flip side to that, which I don't think often is even acknowledged, is the fact that we never know what's going on in other people's lives. And a lot of people can look like they've got it all figured out and they're on top of the world. But I'm sure all of us in our own individual lives have sometimes had a friend or a colleague that behind closed doors we come to realize, oh, maybe it wasn't as great as I thought, or maybe they're facing challenges that we're not aware of. And I think there's a lot of people that have these very highly valued homes now, or higher, and there's been huge layoffs at Google and other places in the area. People that I know personally that have talked about having to sell their house or move cross country, or just what are they going to do, particularly as they're older and have to stay in the workforce longer. So I guess as a part of all of these discussions, I just want people to consider that those people over the $2 million threshold or whatever, you don't know what's going on in their life day to day. And I think we just need to respect that too. And I guess, again, the reason I stood up is every morning we'll have the news on, maybe in the kitchen, and we're watching all the stuff about the election, and we're trying to explain to our kids that no matter what your view is, you have to respect the other side's view. And they feel as strongly that they're right as you do. And I think we all know that the country is very much divided. And the thing that worries me about this dynamic more than anything, and I didn't think about this till I came in tonight, is what worries me is that as we head down this road, and if this is the formula we've chosen, then as we move forward and as expenses continue to increase, which they will, we're going to double down on this formula. I don't expect people are going to, like, as things start to escalate and the total dollars needed, it's going to be politically and otherwise uncomfortable to want to go back retroactively to all the people that are benefiting and feeling support and love about this. So it's going to start doubling down on the formula, and you're going to start stretching that gap even further. And as much as we're talking about community and inclusivity and something, and we shouldn't talk in terms of winners and losers, these charts are drawing a line down the middle. And there are winners and there are losers. And my worry is that 3 years from now, we come back to this, there's going to be a division of where people are actually seated. There's the people that are on one side and the people on the other side. So, sorry, I'll end there, but it's just, I know this is a blunt instrument. I know there's no great answers, but this could lead to some really complicated future meetings. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Weber.
Yes, Sven Weber, 50 Belknap, member of Public Works Commission, but talking on my own behalf. So I actually don't know what is right and what is wrong here. There are a few things from my observation. Is one, I think it was a nice one-time trick to put that in place to hide the real cost of the middle school in that 1 year where it would have affected a lot of taxpayers. So it was taking a nice accounting trick into place and shifting that cost to renters and higher property value. But I think it's not a solution for a general systematic problem Concord has. And that is the denominator for defining our taxes going up by 8% per year or even more. And we have significant infrastructure projects and other things in front of us, and we need to finance that. So if I just assume the 8% and say, okay, in 15 years from now I want to retire, what is my tax bill? It will be massive. All right, today I moved into a town 4 years ago. Now my tax bill is higher than my mortgage. Now my tax bill is higher than bringing one kid through college. If I make a 15-year assumption, that is kind of double 8 years and double then again. So if I even do that for the lower income part here, the below break-even point thing, in 15 years from now, that $8,720 tax bill is a $32,000 tax bill. And that's for the lower end. Not to talk about where others and me sit. I know I cannot afford the tax bill in 15 years from now. No way, because my income is not going up the same way. So I think we heard certain things, and we have as a town only a few measures to do it. One is think about the cost, the other is diversifying revenue stream. And we have to think about that. We cannot throw that trick out every year, because to make the same trick again, we would have to increase it from 10% to 20%, and then increase it from 20% to 30%, and then we are limited. So we have to think about our systematic problems and how we get that solved. And I think it's very hard to return that back here. So we have to solve the systematic part.
Thank you, Mr. Bieber. Mr. Fay.
Good evening, Brett Fye, 149 Spencer Brook Road. I didn't prepare tonight to speak, but I'm going to speak. I think we need to understand everybody in this community. And what I mean by that is assessments on property taxes is just a way to allocate the town's spending, right? So if your assessment goes up, but everybody else's assessment goes up, and it's proportionally the same, you're going to carry the same burden of the increase in spending in this town. Last year, on the better part of a flight out to Los Angeles, I spent 4.5 hours analyzing the assessed values of Concord's homes. Last year, the average assessment increase for a home less than $1 million was up 11%. The average condo was up 6%. The average home over $2 million was up 21%. So just naturally, there would have been a redistribution of last year's tax burden because of how values were reassessed. We put on top of that then the residential tax exemption. There are people in this room that had 30% tax increases last year, while folks in lower valued homes actually had a decrease. And then we say the residential tax exemption, it's only $700 to a house that's $2.5 million. But they had a 21% increase off of the base. We're discounting that completely. And I think we need to stop and think about one another. And when we implement a policy like this, slow down, understand the numbers, understand the impact before you move forward. And that didn't happen last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fye. Mr. Bader.
Looks like I might be wrapping things up. Stephen Bader again, 7 River Street. I am a Housing Authority board member, but I am not speaking on behalf of the Housing Authority. I'm involved in some other organizations in town. I'm not speaking for them either. Thank you. I am a landlord, however. I have 3 residential rental properties, and you can call me stupid, but I don't base my rents on the change in the real estate taxes. As Mr. Dane said earlier, I base it on the market. And I think there are some other property owners here in the room, and if they tell me that they are raising their rents because of the change in the real estate taxes and not because of what the market will bear, I'd be a little bit skeptical. I think we all know how the markets work. The peanut butter jars shrink, the toilet rolls shrink, and they charge you more, and they blame it on something else, but the real cause is because that's what the market will bear. I also think your point, Mary, about let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have a very limited choice and range of options on how to provide some limited relief to some lower valued property owners. It's great. I think Ellen puts forward some good ideas. I've heard some other good ideas here tonight, but that's a little bit like substituting for the Affordable Care Act. It's great to talk about other plans, but let's see a plan before we move away from what we have in hand. So I urge you to continue the residential tax exemption. It's not perfect, but it's better than anything else that's been brought up tonight that could be put in place next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bader.
We have one online.
We have one online. I see Ms. Dritt. Pamela?
Yes, thank you very much. Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. I want to appreciate you and everyone who spoke this evening. I learned some things I didn't know, but also I want us to remember that we don't have control over the economy as much as we'd like. And sometimes we as a town have contradictory goals. We want diversity, but that means that we have to help those who don't have the economic ability to live here. And there's not going to be anything that is going to be considered fair by everyone. I echo what Stefan said. We need to try to do our best to shift the, not to have a flat tax. This is our way of lessening, making a more graduated tax on our property taxes so that those that have the property with the most value pay a higher percentage of the tax bill than those with lesser properties. And the market is going to adjust in all kinds of ways, including people with million-dollar mansions cashing out, or people who, anyway, there isn't much we can do. And unless we have something that is actually implementable, then I think we should stick with this, because it is helpful on the main, although there are certainly examples of unjust results from this. However, one thing I do agree with is we really could use a lot more analysis. Please do the analysis if it's possible. And I don't think that there's any negativity to having a citizen committee studying this either.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online?
No.
Okay. I'll go to the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Richard Lloyd. I live at 20 Crest Street in West Concord. Fast approaching 90 years there. My family's been there. My sister's older than I am, can't be here this evening. My neighbors and my friends struggle every year to pay their taxes. And my own fear is that there are certain people I know in West Concord that probably can't be here, but I'm in fear they're going to have to go to a blood bank to pay their next tax bill. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jill Kolpak from Concord Green.
Ms. Kolpak.
And a little closer? Okay. We are probably one of the most affordable places in the town of Concord now. And many of our residents are people who have sold their more expensive homes to move there. But the prices there are going crazy too. But I think a lot of us really appreciated the break that we got. I've been there 43 years, so I've been around there a long time. But I do hear many good things from other people about increasing the revenue coming into town and all of that. But I would like to see us keep this break at least for a bit while we study the rest of the issue and the rest of the possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kolpak.
Hi, I'm Rich Higgins, 542 Elm Street.
Mr. Ames?
I'm very much in favor of the residential tax exemption. It's not perfect, but overall I think it's the best possible solution. It really helps a lot of seniors in town, a lot of people who have, spent their whole life or most of their lives in town, supported the town throughout the years, and this has really, helped them to be able to afford to stay in their homes as opposed to selling and moving out. It also helps, lower income people that are in town, and young families that are, you know, trying to move into town or have just moved into town and struggling to pay that mortgage. This gives them a little bit of, you know, leg up to try to, you know, make that mortgage payment. So I'm very much in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbs.
My name is Bob Marquis. I'm at 1472 Main Street in Concord. My first home cost $19,900, and that was some 50 years ago. I read the Concord Bridge quite frequently, and I see the educational budget is already in the arrears of $495,000. If I don't pay a bill, someone knocks on my door, and if I don't pay it for 2 months, they throw me out. That doesn't seem to be the case when it comes to the government or anybody else. They can just float things forever. I think what we're looking at here is exactly what the end will look like. Has someone drawn me a picture of exactly what you want the town of Concord to look like? I know a lot of things that I want, and probably I can pick up 7 or 8 of them, but I have to make a decision as to the 2 or 3 I can no longer afford. If diversity is part of the deal, I don't know how any young people can come to this town and live. House right next to me went for $1.5 million, and a young couple with 2 kids came in and said, how the hell do they afford that? I don't know. But what I want you to do is draw a precise picture that I can see in a TV screen of what you want this town to look like. And some of the stuff you can afford and some you can't. The young man that talked about bringing commercial property into here is trying to figure out a way beyond the residency to generate the money to pay for our perfect community. The person just said on the TV thing there, more analysis. I know we want a diverse society, and in order to have that, we have to help some people stay here. If that's part of the picture we want, this is a good thing. But show me precisely what the end is going to look like when we're through these discussions. Then we'll figure out what we can pay for and what we can't, and what we can't, we got to figure out where we're going to get the money. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Zoom. I see a hand raised. Mr. Bergman?
Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue. I am chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, but speaking on my own behalf. First, I want to thank the Select Board for not only its policy decision last year, but also for the conversation that you've invited this year. There are, and I just wanted to say, there are many questions raised, including what's the impact on renters. We know that in the coming years, we're going to see over 400 brand new rental units from the 240Bs that have been approved. More still, perhaps, from housing component at MCI Concord, and perhaps even on some of the surplus properties which could develop housing with zero land cost. So as we consider all of those things, I would urge the Select Board to reach out to the housing groups, among others, and involve us in a community discussion about how to navigate the problems that the community is having. It's not just about housing. It's not just about what the size of the budget is or what the needs of the various town departments are. It's about the community itself. And I think that having a process with a broad representation from folks who can bring part of the answers forward, that we will find a better path to getting along with each other. And that's an important thing for us to do. So thank you to the Select Board for your leadership in raising this issue and having this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Mr. Palumbo?
Thank you. Joe Palumbo, Black Horse Place. I'm a member of the DI Commission, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. First of all, thank you for having this forum, letting us talk about this, because clearly there's a lot of, we have a lot of perspectives on it. And I think I've heard so many good ideas tonight about, we clearly need to do more about our, creation of revenue, because that's the ultimate problem here. We know that housing and more people in town, Mass Tax Fairness Bureau shows, the more folks we get, it's going to help us. Corporate work, there's a lot of options. That's going to take some time. In the meantime, I think what we've heard about are the seniors that live with us, that this instrument, people keep calling it blunt, but it's doing something. It's helping some folks stay here. It's helping some folks make their lives better. It's helping increase our economic diversity. If we can do that in the meantime, that seems like a good thing to do. I mean, just on a very simple human basis, it seems a positive, powerful thing to do to stay a diverse, economically diverse community by helping specifically our seniors and others. It's not perfect, but in the short term, it seems like a place we need to go. It's not our fault, but it is the fault of the 20th century. Concord's done a lot of restrictive zoning, and we've done restrictive zoning for over 100 years in this part of the state, and that's part of the burden we have now. We need to figure out how to get more economic vitality and more people living here to help us really become this new Concord we're about to become. Those 60 acres are going to open up. There's a lot of opportunities in the next 30 years. But for our folks who are here right now, we need to help them. And I think we need to stay positive. There's a lot of words tonight about artificial subsidies, winners and losers, and divisiveness. And I don't think that's what you're doing at all. I think you're doing the best you can with the tools you have. So we're here for you, and just keep at it and help our seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palumbo. Mr. Bucas.
Reiner Bucas, 1360 Monument Street. Of our 33 years now in Concord, I spent 15 of those years on the Tax Fairness Committee. And many of the issues that you've brought up, the issues that the Select Board has been trying to deal with, are not new issues. They've been dealt with, discussed, fought over, and all run into the same barrier, which is a lack of gonadal fortitude in the Massachusetts legislature.
That's right.
You can look that one up if you find it. Right? Because the town of Concord, if you stick with the tools that we are allowed to use, which the chair of the Select Board has mentioned several times, we have to work with the tools we're allowed to use. And they are imperfect tools. They are not adapted to the things that we are trying to change or move. And thus, we wind up with something like the RTE, which is a very imperfect tool. And if you try to think what happens as you move slightly into the future, that while we knew that there were in the town, as much as you had to think of it, there are people in the town whose income is $25,000 a year or less. Those are people to whom $1,000 a year is $3 a day. That equals their whole adjustable budget. Whereas for somebody, and therefore they win something from this. Whereas for other people with a $60,000 tax bill and saving $3,000 or even $5,000, and that's just 5%. And it's not making a big difference to them. So we are stuck with this. And therefore, I can't say from that background that this is the wrong thing to do. It's one of the few things we can do, and that can be helpful to a subset of people. But we really, because it is within the remit of the Select Board to consider things that the town needs to be doing to make this kind of thing meaningful. For residential tax exemption, that means it's an exemption only for people who are residents. It does not apply to businesses, for example. And our tax base is very narrowly focused on the residential. So when, for example, we hear of what's going to be done at the prison site, and there's an enormous amount of pressure to make that housing and make it affordable housing and so forth, I don't hear any people saying that this needs to be turned into Kendall Square West, Kendall Square West, with a major biotech center to use the talent that we have here and that can come down the road, come down Route 2. That needs to be developed into something which is non-residential and pays taxes, which then means the residential exemption really has some benefit. Right? So, but we don't have that, except that I'd love to hear the select board work on the RTE by saying, let's get the tax base broadened and get things going that way wider. The other thought that I would make is just that I think when I came to town, and I've got pictures to show, my hair was dark. Right? So I have given my dark hair in part to the service of the town, and I'm proud to do that. Proud to have been able to do that. But I have heard passion here expressed from younger people saying, it's a lousy system, it doesn't work, it isn't good, it isn't for the right people. For heaven's sake, where's your gonadal fortitude to get on a committee, organize a committee, and if we're going to go to the state to get the power to tax ourselves, I would point out, and in 2012, the town Board of Selectmen approved, the FinCom approved, and the town meeting voted in favor of a local option income tax, which then was refused by the state, saying it wouldn't be constitutional. That's not the realm that we're supposed to talk about today.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
I know that, but we've got to enlist the people say, how are you going to make these things work? All right? Then that's what we've got to do. We've got to dig in there. And I don't know if I've got the energy anymore as I totter back to my chair, but some of the passionate people, go for it. Thank you.
Just before we take our next speaker, I wanted to note that there's about 80 people watching online in Zoom and a pretty full room here today. So we do appreciate all the time that people are taking out to make their voices heard. And there's been quite a few references to land use decisions that we need to make. We had a well-attended forum, the first of many public engagement sessions around the MCI Concord property, which is an important piece of the puzzle. Other people have mentioned other pieces of open space. The land we have in Concord is obviously very finite. We're not going to get a piece of any adjacent community anytime too soon. So I think we should really try and engage as forcefully as we're engaging with this conversation in how do we make the best use of the relatively unprecedented opportunities that we have in front of us for 2229 Main Street, for MCI Concord, for the Peabody School property. We don't get these opportunities very often, and so we also look forward to hearing from all of you on those sorts of ideas as well.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
If I may, I just want to respond to a few of the comments that we've heard so far. Yes, the RTE is a very blunt instrument, no question. And many of us, including myself, would love to use other tools, such as income. That has been suggested by many people tonight. But it is not an option, as Ryan Bucas just so eloquently said. We are not allowed to do so many things under state law. We are a creature of the state, which is really insane. But what is an option, Meredith went over and is in the packet on the first or the second page. All of these things that are legal have been tried in Concord. All this entire list. And this is why we've gone to the RTE, because We've tried all of these other things, even though it's not perfect. So I just wanted to, most of you know all of this already, but just in case, I want to go over that.
Very good, thank you. We're coming to the end, and Mr. Feely, you haven't spoken yet. Is that correct? Why don't you come up and speak, please?
I'll be very brief. Rich Feely, 347 Lexington Road. I'm personally in favor of the RT, but I want to make one specific point, which is don't get rid of it now, because everybody that sells a house because their taxes are going up too much will be probably selling a smaller house. And what's happening in this town is that units, houses, 1,500, 1,700, 1,800 square feet, that could be viable housing for our kids, for the people who work here, are getting sold. If we can spread out that period, I'm hoping we can find some other sources of revenue, not local property taxes, that will enable us to buy some of those houses, subsidize them in a way that people can live here. But if we accelerate the need of older people to sell because their taxes have gone up too much, we're going to lose those houses before we can do anything about it. So I strongly urge you to keep it. Let's discuss some of the things that were discussed here tonight, maybe move forward with them, but don't pull it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feely. The two gentlemen in the back, you've already spoken, yes? We're at time right now?
This was a listening time, right?
But it's, we have a deadline. It's 6 to 8 o'clock, and we're at 8 o'clock. Do you have something?
I have something brief.
Brief, very good.
Something brief.
Good, be brief. Be brief.
So I think we have a spending problem. I've been in town for about 7 years. I've been to pretty much all the town meetings, maybe 5 out of the 7 town meetings over that 7-year period. And what's remarkable to me is the way spending bill after spending bill, warrant after warrant, somewhere between 95 and 98% of spending bills sail through this process. You've got basically a 12-hour meeting spread over 3 nights that effectively excludes the vast majority of the town because people are physically just, they got families, they got jobs, they got responsibilities. They just don't have the energy to then sit through a 12-hour meeting, and sometimes things get moved from one day to the next. So the people who go are the advocates for whatever spending that they want to promote. So you got basically 5% of the town spending the money for everybody else. And I believe at the last meeting, a $50 million blank check was written for some battery for solar power when the solar array at the middle school doesn't even connect with the rest of the electrical grid in Concord. So there's just this wild spending without controls. This is from somebody who's been through a lot of budget meetings, allocating scarce resources in a company that grew and grew. We can learn to live within our means. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lauren.
Joe Lauren, Southfield Road. So I've been sitting here trying to understand how I could get behind a continuation of the RTE. And here's what the conclusion I've come to, and folks have said this already. If the select board could get behind as much commitment and energy in understanding how to rein in our spending and to diversify our tax base to more commercial and business revenue, then I could get behind the RTE. But we can't do one, those are 3-leg stool there that has to be balanced. And all we're doing is we're spending all of our time on raising taxes for a portion of the people to spend, to cover all the spending that's going on. So diversify our tax base, rein in our spending, and you might get more people behind the RT.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lauren. That was an excellent way to end the night. I want to thank everybody. I want to make just a few comments. I want to repeat what Meredith Stone's offered. If you have any questions about your specific tax bill, please go to the assessor. They're there. They're willing to help you. They'll show you the changes in your tax bill. And if you weren't heard or you think about something that you wish you had said tonight, please send us a letter. We read our letters. We publish our letters. We listen. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time. We heard a lot of really good things. Thank you.
Thank you.